New law, called the Separate Car Act of 1890, was passed in Louisiana and segregated railroad cars by race. But the black activist community in New Orleans refused to let an act like that go unchallenged. Let's go to the thought bubble. Pulling from activism tactics that had been used in other southern cities, local activists of color, called the Committee of Citizens, started to organize a protest against this law. They hoped to use it as a test case in the court system against what they saw as an explicitly unjust law. This wasn't a random act of civil disobedience. This was a well-orchestrated plan. The railroad company was made aware of Plessy's race prior to him showing up to the station. The Committee of Citizens even hired a private detective who had the power to arrest him specifically for violating the Separate Car Act and not some other law. This way, they could make sure they were challenging that specific law in court. The plan was for Plessy to sit down in the whites-only section of the train, and for the detective to arrest, detain, and charge him. And that's what happened. So in 1892, Plessy boarded a whites-only car on the East Louisiana Railroad. When the conductor approached him and asked him about his race, he explained that he was 1/8 black and refused to move to the colored-only section. The aforementioned detective then removed Plessy from the train and arrested him. This was all according to the Committee of Citizens' plan, and they were there ready to bail him out. Plessy had done his job. The next step was for them to challenge the Separate Car Act of 1890 in court. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Plessy was ultimately charged for the crime of sitting in a whites-only car. That decision was upheld in the state court, but the legal question made its way to the Supreme Court. And this was a really, really big deal. The case's appeal to the Supreme Court showed how seriously the Committee of Citizens took the issue because they pushed for the appeal. And most importantly, just like today, when cases go to the Supreme Court, it's because the court believes that there is something important for them to say about the issue. They want to make a national statement and possibly set a new precedent. And boy, did they ever. Plessy's lawyers argued that the Louisiana segregation laws violated his 13th and 14th Amendment rights. You might remember them as two of the Reconstruction Amendments which were passed after the Civil War to enfranchise Black Americans. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, and for the sake of this argument, the state-sponsored subjugation of Black Americans. And the 14th Amendment gave Black Americans citizenship rights and equal protection. Plessy's lawyers also argued that the Separate Car Act in Louisiana reinforced the false idea that white Americans were superior to Black Americans. Well, the Supreme Court rejected all of these arguments. Basically, they argued the legal question about whether Louisiana law promoted Black American inferiority wasn't relevant. And infamously, the Supreme Court also stated that separate facilities mandated by law were actually okay, as long as each race's facilities were equal. Justice Henry Brown said in the opinion, quote, "We consider the underlying fallacy of the plaintiff's argument to consist in the assumption that the enforced separation of the two races stamps the colored race with a badge of inferiority. If this be so, it is not by reason of anything found in the act, but solely because the colored race chooses to put that construction upon it." On the other side, Justice John Marshall Harlan was the only one who dissented, stating that on a functional level, quote, "The white race deems itself to be the dominant race in this country, and that behavior is unconstitutional." He used the term colorblind to describe the Constitution, arguing that the rights in the Constitution apply to everyone. The case was decided 7-1 in favor of Ferguson, the Louisiana state judge who originally ruled against Plessy. The Plessy decision legalized and codified what was already happening to Black Americans: segregation, humiliation, and exclusion in everyday life. It's sometimes considered to be the start of the Jim Crow era. So when you watch those civil rights movies they show on MLK Day, or look at the pictures in your textbooks of white-only stores and water fountains, know that the United States legal system protected white supremacy through segregation for almost 70 years. In Plessy V Ferguson, the Supreme Court essentially said it's okay to keep Black and white people in separate facilities, because the act of simply separating them itself doesn't make their treatment unequal. But practically, every member of the court knew that wasn't true. Everyone knew that Black Americans weren't provided with the resources to create equal spaces for themselves, and that the facilities and accommodations that they were provided with were often of lower quality than their white counterparts. And that wasn't by accident. Part of the reason that many white people wanted to keep things separate in the first place was because they wanted a physical and social manifestation of the inequality between Black and white people. And this is what Plessy V Ferguson provided. The Supreme Court was given a test with Plessy v. Ferguson, and it is a test that it failed. And it is a profound reminder of the power the judicial system has had and continues to have in shaping the landscape of American life. And while we must study, learn from, and acknowledge the court's failure, our country does not have to be defined by it. Moving forward, we can make a different set of choices, enact different laws, and have different court rulings that center justice, equity, and opportunity for every single person in this country.